The Sussex Children's Advocacy Center, also known as Ginnie's House, has been serving children and families since 1997. The professionals in Sussex County recognized that abused children were further traumatized by interviews being conducted in local police departments, hospitals, or sometimes in the homes where the abuse occurred. Furthermore, children were being interviewed multiple times and made to tell their story over and over again. A group of professionals began meeting to develop a more child-friendly system to conduct child abuse investigations in Sussex County.
About 20 years ago, I was a board member on a Catholic hospital board, and a middle school superintendent came to my CEO at the hospital and said, "We know we have children that have been abused in our classes and we don't know what to do with them. Can you help us?" At the time, my husband was in the New Jersey State Senate, and I went home and talked to my husband about the issue. And then he called the prosecutor and said, "Is this an issue for you?" Because he knew that ultimately we were trying to get convictions for perpetrators, and that's really how it started. The mission statement is that we provide comfort, healing, and hope for the victims and the non-offending family members. One of the most important things at Ginnie's House is that the change by bringing them here is that they're not having to tell what happened to them 4 or 5 different times. And so we don't want to re-victimize the victims, and we mitigate that by having them tell the story once and getting it on tape or CD so that we can use it in court and it's admissible in court and they don't have to go. Before Ginnie's House, our victims had to go to Bergen County to an emergency room setting about an hour and a quarter away. We wanted to do something here, and that's why we put a medical suite here so that we could do the forensic gathering of evidence, so that we could provide law enforcement, the prosecutor and his team, with all of the things that they look to do when they're presenting a case in front of a jury. So the medical piece was huge, and I felt strongly that the community has a vested interest in what happens here to their neighbor and people that they have never recognized happening to anybody. They help us raise money so that we can build the programs here, hire the most effective staff, and make sure that we have the most up-to-date programming for our victims and non-offending family members. I think for the community, it's very important for them to know that Ginnie's House is their resource. This is the place that they should be coming to disclose anything that they may have heard or seen, because we have all of the professionals here, and that is the most appropriate way for them to know that they can help the victim.
4 main types of abuse are: there's physical abuse, sexual abuse with contact and non-contact, emotional abuse, and neglect. Physical abuse is defined as deliberately hurting a child or causing injury to a child, such as bruises, broken bones, burns, or cuts. Children who are physically abused often suffer violence such as being hit, kicked, poisoned, burned, slapped, or having objects thrown at them. It's important to know in New Jersey, there is no law preventing the use of physical discipline. Sexual abuse is when a child is forced or persuaded to take part in sexual activities. This doesn't have to be physical contact, and it can happen online. There are 2 different types of child sexual abuse: contact abuse and non-contact abuse. Contact abuse refers to touching activities or when an abuser makes physical contact with a child. It includes touching any part of the body sexually when a child is wearing clothes or not. Non-contact abuse includes non-touching activities such as grooming, exploitation, persuading children to perform sexual acts over the internet, or flashing. Child neglect is when a parent or caregiver is unable to provide for a child's basic needs, whether adequate food, shelter, medical treatment, or supervision. Outside circumstances sometimes affect a parent or caregiver's ability to care for a child, including but not limited to substance misuse and mental health difficulties. Examples of emotional abuse can be constant belittling, shaming, or humiliating a child. The parent can be cold or may be cold and distant, ignoring the child's needs for nurturing and caring. Emotional abuse can severely damage a child's mental health or social development, leaving lifelong psychological scars.
In New Jersey, preventing child abuse is everyone's concern. Reporting suspected abuse or neglect is an important step in potentially saving a child's life. New Jersey law requires that anyone having reasonable cause to suspect child abuse or neglect must report it to the Division of Child Protection and Permanency Centralized Screening Hotline at 1-800-NJ-ABUSE. Referrals can be made anonymously.
If you suspect a child you are working with or have interaction with is being abused or neglected by a parent or caregiver, you should absolutely call the Abuse and Neglect Hotline immediately. You should never wait to make a report, and you should always err on the side of caution. So after you make a report to the Abuse and Neglect Hotline, there are no next steps. You've fulfilled your obligation, you've fulfilled your duty. After that, the Division of Child Protection and Permanency will release an investigator to investigate the allegations that you presented to screening. Under the Good Citizen Act, anybody who makes a report of a child abuse and neglect to New Jersey's hotline is protected from any civil or criminal liability. They're allowed to remain anonymous. They're allowed to provide their information if they so choose. But in making a report, you are free from any civil or criminal liability.
It is not your responsibility to conduct a child abuse investigation. DCP&P and prosecutor staff are trained to complete investigative interviews that are legally defensible in court. Your goal is to learn basic information from the child that suggests the need for further investigation. Don't make promises you cannot keep, especially if the child asks you to keep their abuse a secret. It is best to be honest with the child from the start and explain that you may need to assist them in getting help by sharing this information with Child Protective Services. Do listen carefully to what the child is saying and check your body language. Children don't like to upset adults. They may stop talking if they think the information is making you angry or sad. Don't criticize the perpetrator, because it is likely a family member and the child will feel they are betraying their family by telling. You want the child to feel comforted and reassured by you. If you're making a child abuse report, be ready to provide the following information if possible. Child's name and date of birth. Any siblings' names and dates of birth. Parents' names. A home address and emergency phone numbers. What time the child leaves school or daycare for the day. A description of the information shared by the child, including the exact words used. A description of any marks, bruises, or injuries. If you do not have access to all the information, don't let that delay or stop you from making a timely referral. Once child abuse is reported, specially trained Child Protective Service workers and detectives from the prosecutor's office will conduct an investigation that includes interviewing children, siblings, non-offending parents, suspects, and any witnesses. All available evidence is gathered to make the strongest case possible. This is when Ginnie's House CAC becomes the safe place for a child and family to come so that the child abuse investigation can happen.
Prosecution is generally involved with Ginnie's House right from the get-go. There are really two primary ways that cases come into Ginnie's House. It's either through referrals from the police departments or through the Division of Child Protection and Permanency. If there is an allegation of a crime or potential criminal charges, then the Sussex County Prosecutor's Office will be the lead agency in doing the interviews and collection of evidence and following through with the initial part of the case, because we have specifically trained detectives and assistant prosecutors that have been trained in handling these types of cases, interviewing children, and doing it in a child-centric way. With regards to cases that we may do the initial interview and there are no criminal charges, Either A, no real criminal allegation was made, there was a misunderstanding, or there may be reasons that we cannot proceed with a criminal charge. But that doesn't mean that Ginnie's House and our goals end at that point. The Division, again, of Child Protection and Permanency, they then look out for the best interests of the child in the civil court matter in making sure either A, that the child is getting counseling, that they are protected in other ways, so that it doesn't end just because there's no criminal prosecution. The important thing for the child and the family, and for families to know, is that the professionals and the entire team at Ginnie's House are there for them for the entire process. And even after the criminal trial or a plea is done, that doesn't end the child or the family's relationship with Ginnie's House. We still continue to make sure that they are receiving the counseling that they need and any other type of support. Ginnie's House doesn't directly provide legal services to victims or their families. However, they're a clearinghouse for legal services to a degree. What happens is we are a center point where the prosecution and DCP&P attorneys are here, again for the same purpose, and that is for the protection of the child and the well-being of the family. We are there as the attorneys on the state side to make sure that that child and family is protected.
My daughter came to me one day and she told me a story, and it was a story that really no parent wants to hear from a child. And she said that a family member had done something to her that they really shouldn't have. And so we went to get help for her and we found Ginnie's House. There was an interview for myself with the two therapists here and with an investigator, and they were all very warm, very comforting, and you felt comfortable sitting down telling your story, even though it was something that really you'd never want to have to talk about or relive again. They were really great that way. And we went through the story from my side, what I knew about it, and then they were able to talk to my daughter as well. And they've been so helpful, so wonderful, and right now she is really flourishing. She's just a normal kid, she's happy, she's bubbly, she has fun. It's like, for her, it never happened. She's really recovered better than I would have ever imagined.
When a child first arrives at Ginnie's House, they generally arrive with a parent or caregiver, and oftentimes a worker from the Division of Child Protection and Permanency. We'll have a quick review of the case beforehand with the parent or caregiver, as well as the member from DCP&P before we come up to the interview room. Fairly often the child who comes in are a victim of some type of sexual abuse or physical abuse against the child. Or oftentimes they're also witnesses to things like domestic violence or some type of violent crime. We have two interview rooms here at Ginnie's House. Both rooms are child-friendly, almost a home-like setting. The interview rooms are fairly small in size, but that's on purpose. That's meant to be able to put the interviewer and the child in close proximity to each other, allow them to have a conversation and not have any distractions. The interview rooms are not an interview room where a camera is right in your face. The cameras are actually secreted into a hidden item on the wall. The child doesn't even know they're on camera for the most part. The interview equipment here at Ginnie's House is a computer-based recording system that allows a police officer or another detective or an assistant prosecutor to watch the interview as it happens without interfering with it or without causing any distractions to the interviewer or the child. When we initially enter the room, there's a switch that we hit on the wall that starts the recording. When we conclude the interview and we walk out, we hit the switch again and it turns the recording off. It's very simple and easy to use. The equipment saves everything. We're able to burn it right to a DVD where we can give it over to the prosecutors for review. Recording equipment is set up in a separate room. It allows for the observer to move the camera around if it needs to be moved, if it needs to follow the child, or if the child draws on the easel. It can follow, it can zoom in or zoom out. We have equipment that allows for a monitor or an observer of an interview to provide information or give recommendations for the interviewer to ask. We have an earpiece and a microphone that connects wirelessly, and the observer can ask something or recommend something to the interviewer where they can include it in the interview without having to leave the room. The forensic part of the interview is meant to elicit factual information from a child without giving them any influence into their answers. We ask non-leading questions where the child uses their own terms, their own language, whatever they are comfortable talking about with us to provide us that information. A younger child is going to have a little more difficulty remembering every little detail. So the interview might be tailored a little more along the lines of just who and what. While an older child might have a little more information about locations or dates or certain times and events. So we tailor our interviews to note the questions along those lines.
Another important step in the process of responding to a child abuse investigation is to attend to the medical needs of the victims.
Ginnie's house has a child-friendly medical examination room. It's both decorated in a soothing and a non-threatening manner. The children feel a little bit more comfortable than if they would be in a stark exam room in a hospital per se. Ginnie's house uses the state-of-the-art equipment for our examinations, both for photography and for examination. One of our pieces of equipment is a colposcope. The colposcope allows us to examine at a high vision, like a microscope, as well as take pictures. It's non-invasive. None of our procedures are invasive. Basically, we do a head-to-toe examination, just like a child might be familiar with seeing their own pediatrician. This makes them a little bit more comfortable. We listen to their heart and look in their ears. We check their tummy and gradually work down to their private parts so that when we get to that part of it, they are a little bit more relaxed because they feel like, you know, this is not an unexpected examination. We collect our evidence using little Q-tip swabs. We swab the areas. We take pictures of the areas. These are placed in a special state kit, which is then sent to Trenton for the state lab. We maintain a strict chain of custody, so there's no question as to how the samples were obtained, and we turn it over to law enforcement.
As families go through the steps of investigation and prosecution, they are faced with many challenges. Caregivers may struggle with issues such as blaming themselves as a result of not knowing the abuse was happening, and for not knowing what to say to their children.
Ginnie's house has put the therapy in place to try and help address the trauma, because the therapy is often trauma-based, to help them process what's happened. We don't want this to be something that defines them for the rest of their lives. Obviously, it's very important to make the family and especially the children feel comfortable. We do that throughout the house, but most notably we do it in here where I'm sitting in the playroom, where it's very child-friendly. We want it to be very welcoming. We want the kids to be able to come in here and feel comfortable to deal with what has happened to them. A friendly environment, a warm environment is very important for that. It's important for a child to feel comfortable and to find ways that are right for them to express it. So for younger children, it's often through play therapy, because words, they don't always have the words, they don't always know how to express what's going on for them, but they are able to do it through play. And then it can be processed so that they can get the help that they need. We also do offer therapy for the family if needed. Oftentimes parents can be triggered by what's happened to them because of their own history of abuse. And we want to help them because if they're unfortunately struggling, they're not going to be in the best place to help their child. We also offer a family advocacy program where it includes psychoeducation for the family. Parents don't always know what to expect after a child's been abused in some way or exposed to some sort of trauma. And we give them the information they need to help them understand what's happened, what to expect, what typical behaviors might come of a child being abused, and how to deal with that and cope with it. It also gives the parent a chance to kind of talk about what their own experience has been, because it's very stressful for the whole family. Through the family advocacy program at Ginnie's house, we also offer assistance and guidance with regard to the criminal system. A lot of parents aren't familiar with it, they haven't been through this before, so we try to help them where we can, give them the information they need, know what's coming next, even to the point where if they want support at court, if their child's going to have to testify, or if they would just like support there, Ginnie's house will be there for them.
Representatives of these agencies are part of the Sussex County Multidisciplinary Team, which meets monthly to discuss case status, share information, and strategize about how best to meet the needs of families as they take the steps towards healing. Ginnie's house provides the coordination and leadership for the Sussex County MDT team.
The multidisciplinary team is several members from different functions that can provide services for the child, including Division of Child Protection and Permanency, the prosecutor's office, a number of different mental health groups, lots of different service-oriented functions that could help the child and the families get the right services they need.
The Ginnie's House MDT program team continually meets with regards to each individual case, whereby Ginnie's House has liaisons there where we oversee the case and understand what some of the needs of the child and family may be, and they are able to, from those meetings, be able to refer the family to the correct parties that will be able to handle the needs that they have. Since becoming the prosecutor in 2014, I've had an unwavering support of the Ginnie's House program and how important it is, because our legacy will be that we stood for children and their families at their point of greatest need and most vulnerability, and I don't think there is a greater legacy a man can have.